Hello, lovely people. My name is Alan Committie. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be able to speak to you a little bit about characterization. I'm a professional actor, writer, director, comedian, and also a teacher of many years. And so I think I'm happy to share some insights that I've gained over the last number of years in the profession about characterizing and storytelling. Perhaps the best place to start is that as an actor, as a performer across all genres, our first and foremost task is storytelling. We have to understand how to tell a story. And if you're doing that accurately enough, then characterization will follow almost instinctively. If you think about the great stories, let's go to Shakespeare. Shakespeare is probably one of the great storytellers. There are only a certain number of stories available to us. And so what it comes down to ultimately is how you tell the story, which is why, for example, we can have so many productions of Shakespeare plays where they never get boring because the various people playing them will always bring their own interpretation to the story. Now, how does characterization impact on that? Well, I think, for example, if you understand the story from all the various points of view of the characters within that production, you get a more textured story. I'll give you an example. As a teacher, what you might do is if you've got a group of learners and you ask them to tell maybe a very simple story. You can go to a fairy tale or a famous story like Romeo and Juliet, the star-crossed lovers, or you might go to a famous poem or even a story that everyone knows from the community. Why not ask your learners to tell that story from each character's point of view? Suddenly we get the story from a different perspective. I was lucky enough many years ago to play in a show called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. This is a play by Tom Stoppard, and what's brilliant about it is that it presents Shakespeare's play Hamlet from the point of view of two of the smallest characters in the play. In Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I think, appear on 3 or 4 pages in a very, very long play. And yet Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is their story with Hamlet happening in the background. So we see these two characters waiting around, and suddenly Hamlet and Gertrude appear in a very intense conversation in the background. As they turn to go and engage with them, they disappear, and suddenly these two smaller characters are left trying to work out what their world is all about.
In most part of it. What wilt thou do? Thou wilt not murder me? Help! Help!
Help!
No!
Help!
A rat? Dig for a ducky! Dig!
I'm slain!
So what Tom Stoppard, the playwright, has done there is to actually create a new story out of another one. But it might be helpful to your learners to tell the story of Romeo and Juliet from the perspective of Tybalt or Mercutio, or perhaps Juliet's mother or the nurse.
The man Juliet is with is a Montague.
Juliet is a Capulet. The Montagues and Capulets are mortal enemies.
As a bit of stand-up, I used to say to an audience, never forget that in the unbelievable star-crossed lover story of Romeo and Juliet, there was also Rosaline. Romeo was in love with Rosaline when the play starts, but then we don't hear her story. What was her attitude and perspective on Romeo and Juliet? Was she happy at the end that maybe they'd broken up and she was still alive? Sometimes there is a silver lining to not being in every relationship you choose to be in. So, you can look at a story from various perspectives. You can also swap characters. So if you're playing a play like Romeo and Juliet, maybe what you want to do is play the opposite. Romeo should play Juliet's part. Juliet should play the king's part. The king should play the nurse's part.
And palm to palm is holy Palmer's kiss.
Have not saints' lips and holy Palmer's too?
Suddenly you see the story from another character's perspective, and you understand a little bit more about the texture, the nuance, the strategies, the intentions, the subtext that other characters are experiencing in that same story.